You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, Bookstorm podcast followers. We are so excited to share who we have with us today. You know this book. Many of you have written in and said how much you love it. Kristen and I have loved this novel for a good while, so we're thrilled to have Meg Waite Clayton here to talk about her beautiful and important novel, The Postmistress of Paris. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Meg. She is the New York Times bestseller and book club favorite. She is the author of 8 novels. Postmistress of Paris is an international bestseller. It's a Good Morning America buzz book, a New York Times Book Review editor's choice, Publishers Weekly notable book, People Magazine, Indie Next bestsellers, Lone Star Librarian Book of the Month, USA Today, and Amazon Editor's Pick. And Meg, congratulations and very well deserved.
Thank you. It's really the attention this book has been getting is really quite delightful. I could not be more pleased, and I'm very excited to have it coming out in paperback in today. It'll be.
So we are very excited about that too. Very excited. A little more I want to tell about Meg. Her international bestseller, The Last Train to London, which you will recognize, has been translated into 20 languages and adapted into a screenplay chosen for the prestigious Meryl Streep and Nicole Kidman-sponsored The Writers' Lab. This is amazing. Meg has written more than 100 shorter pieces for the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Runner's World, Public Radio. And I love to say that she particularly likes to write stories and novels that show the challenges that women face, which is a cause very close to Kristen and my heart as well. Meg mentors for the Op-Ed Project. She's a member of National Book Critics Circle and the California Bar Association. And I want to take this from her bio. Her dream since she was a child was to be a novelist. She feels incredibly grateful to be able to call herself one. And she says, and I'm going to quote, "Thanks to all of you who, in giving a little of your busy lives to follow my characters, allow me the pleasure of this life." And Meg, in response, we're going to say on behalf of all readers everywhere, thank you for becoming a writer and enlightening us to characters and stories, partially true from history, that have opened our eyes and our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to say, when you read that introduction, I think I so remember the days when I was starting to write and trying to get published and sending out stories and having them rejected and sending out novels and having them rejected. And it just, sometimes I just have to pinch myself that's my writing resume. I'm really feel very blessed, and I also feel like I think anybody who wants to write should give it a go. As my husband said when I first started writing, or encouraging me to first start writing, you'll never know if you can do it or not if you don't give it a try.
I love that. And I also say to Kristen and I, because we're always striving at something, and to my kids, if it's too easy, it's not really worthwhile. And so the harder you work, then you get there and look back. And you're there for a reason, Meg. Your writing is beautiful. Your stories are life-changing. They're inspirational. And we're just glad you're doing it.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Well, Meg, we like to give our listeners a little bit of the background of your story. And so, if you'll allow me, I'll just do a little bit of a summary and I won't give away any spoilers. But I would love for you to add anything, or even if I've gotten something wrong, to correct it at the end, if that's okay. All right. The Postmistress of Paris tells the story of a courageous American woman's role in the French resistance during World War II. Nanae Gold and her beautiful dog, Dagobert, lives in the company of Parisian writers and artists. And when the Germans invade France, she flees with a group of friends and their child. Now, she is determined to help. Instead of returning to the US, where she would have been safe and legally able to travel, she begins working with other Americans who are there to help aid refugees, and they've got some other endeavors that they are working on, and she becomes deeply involved with them, including a mission to free a photographer and artist named Edouard Moss from an internment camp in Vichy, France. Now, photographer Edward Moss, he has recently escaped Germany with his young daughter, only to be sent to this French labor camp. And his life collides with Nene's in such beautiful, romantic, and there's that element of danger ways that we are captivated throughout your incredible story. This story actually was inspired by a real life heiress, and she did indeed work with an American who was also working in occupied France. We loved this story of strength and courage and bravery, and honestly, in a very dark time, hope. Would you add anything to your little summary there? I know we're going to get into some details.
That sounds pretty good to me. I think I need to bring you on the road with me, Kristen.
Yes.
We love when people say that. Okay, we say yes.
Well, if we're ready to brave the storm, Meg, Chris, why don't you kick us off?
We're so ready to get into this. I want to say first, for all of our listeners who may have not read this book yet, Kristen and I really believe there isn't enough stories written about World War II France. And what Meg Waite Clayton has done here is take us on a little different type of journey. She's looking at the war from a little different lens, a special vantage point, and we highly recommend it. So, Meg, you showed the reader through this beautiful story how quickly our freedom and our very lives can be wrenched from us by evil. You added a couple characters to this story. They seemed trivial, but as a reader, I thought they were so very important. I actually thought it was brilliant the way that you added them. One character is Dagobert. He is a dog, a beloved dog. The second one is Professor Ellie Mouse. Is it mouse or moose?
Mouse.
Mouse, okay. Who is a stuffed animal kangaroo. We see these two characters all through the story playing little important parts, and it gave the reader this huge juxtaposition that in the midst of crisis, war, your life is falling apart, there are these two little objects, one alive, one not, that provided hope, love, comfort, and even more so, a reminder of how life once was, how life is meant to be. These two were a lifeline at times. Did you intend, as the writer, for these two characters to play such a big role, or did their importance grow and evolve during the story?
That's a really great question, Chris. I would say that if you look at the very beginning, when I'm sketching out the characters and who might be doing what, they were not, in the character list described or anything like that. That having been said, I think both of them were there from the very beginning. Let me start with Professor Ellie Mouse first. I had never written a child character in a major way before I wrote The Last Train to London. But I found in writing that story, it's about the Kindertransport rescue of 10,000 children from Nazi-occupied Europe right before World War II began. I found that I loved writing children. And I think part of the reason I love writing children is because I love children, but also because they are unfiltered in a way that adults are not, and therefore they will say things that that adults would never say. And from a writer's perspective, that can be very, very, it's a great tool, let's just say. But also, children evoke a lot of sympathy in all of us. You put a child in peril, and it's, and all of us want to help that child. Some adults, some of them we'd like to help, some of them maybe not so much. But children, we almost uniformly have empathy for. So I thought when I started the Postmistress of Paris that I would like to have a child character. I thought that child at first was going to be Peterkin, who is T's child, who goes, as you said, with Nanay when they flee Paris as the Nazis are invading. But I found when I started writing chapter 1, and I had Edward show up at an art exhibit that he's a part of, that his daughter Luki was standing there beside him, and she had this stuffed kangaroo in her hands. And I realized that Peterkin's never going to be in peril because he's a nice little French boy in the way that a Jewish girl would be in this situation. And so I decided Luki would be a major character and a point of view character. And to have all my children, I have 2 sons, they both had stuffies their whole lives. They, had little stuffed animals that they loved. And they always expressed themselves, something that they didn't want to own up, their own feeling they didn't want to own to, they would project them onto their little stuffy. And so, if Chris was sad and he didn't want to say he was sad, he would say Belle, his stuffed cow, was sad. And so I think it's a very typical way that children behave. And so that's how Professor Ellie Mouse came to be. She was a way that Luki, Edward's daughter, could express herself when she was saying things that she knew she shouldn't say, basically. The way I found her was I looked for kangaroos, stuffed animals of the period, and one of them I found was this adorable kangaroo, and so I thought that would be the right stuffy for her. And I love that character. It's a funny little mirror, really, for Luki, but it was very fun to write. Obviously, I don't do point of view from Professor Ellie Mouse's point of view, but and then Dagobert is actually based on a real dog. The real character that Nanay is inspired by is a Chicago heiress named Mary Jane Gold. And she, in Paris at this time, had a poodle whose name was Dagobert. The poodle, the details of the real poodle, you could not make it up better. Dagobert, in the course of the book, when anybody mentions the name Hitler, he barks like crazy. And that is actually something that the real Dagobert did. And so really the only liberty I took with the real Dagobert is I made him smaller. I made him a smaller poodle than the real Dagobert was a standard poodle, and you could not be picked up and carried and things like that. I will say that the one thing that your question made me realize, which I hadn't focused on before, is that Dagobert performs much the same role for Nanay as Professor Ellie Mouse does for Luki. She allows her dog, through her dog, she can express feelings that she's not comfortable expressing directly. And so thank you for the question. It's made me learn something about my own writing.
Oh, I just loved it. And I just loved that I think we all have things, even adults in our life, that maybe we take for granted that bring us to a safe, peaceful place, whatever that might be. And that just throughout the war and the terror of war, these 2 loving little characters brought us back to some normalcy. And it was always in the background, softly reminding you, this is not how life is supposed to be. How can we return to that world that we came from? And I thought it was beautifully done, very much so.
Thank you. Thank you.
In those characters, I've got a question for you, but I wanted to just comment. I kept thinking about, we have a child without a mother, we had a stuffed animal without a child, and we have another woman who chose not to have children. And there was this fantastic thematic element of motherhood or choosing no motherhood throughout your story. And so I kept seeing the animals from that standpoint as well.
Thank you. You're actually supposed to, so that's great. On I hope sort of a subconscious level, at least at the beginning. It's interesting. I realized at some point in time when I was looking back on a few of my novels that one common thread through all of them is motherhood, and I'm not sure why that is. Obviously, it's something very very close to me, but it seems to creep into everything I write. So in this, part of the reason I chose that kangaroo was exactly for the reason you're talking about, that she has a pouch, and there's a baby that belongs in the pouch, and sometimes the baby is there and sometimes the baby is not, and that's a very useful kind of metaphorical device for me when it comes to motherhood. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Well, just to kind of change directions just a little bit, your novel explores a number of themes to relating to shining a light on darkness and exposing evil for what it is. Edward had taken a picture of a woman turning away from a Nazi protest, and he had called her a watcher. In fact, I want to quote something that Edward, one of your characters, says. This is what makes a photograph compelling or shocking or moving. We all imagine ourselves innocent, aghast at cruelty, empathetic, human. We don't imagine that in simply watching, we provide an audience. Now, there are profound implications for his concern, right? Are we, by our attention, giving evil an audience and promoting it or allowing it to flourish and spread? Or do you think that by giving an audience to evil, we are holding it accountable and doing the opposite? I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so this is a question that is heavy on my mind at this moment in history, because I do think that we are seeing the rise of fascism around the world again, and the question is, do we give people more microphone, or do we take it away from them? I think it's a careful dance. I think at the moment of like, if you look at, just speaking, to not get political here, speaking about the early days of Hitler's rise, if you turned away from him and didn't give him the attention that he sought at the time when he was first rising to power, perhaps he wouldn't have risen to power. It's you amplify, the press in particular amplifies the the evil that rises up in our society, and we see it in the news now all over the world. We There is a certain fascination among all of us with evil, with bad things happening. It's the same reason people slow down to look at an accident rather than pass it on the side of the road. So there is that. I mean, the more attention you give, the more visibility you give, and that's a bad thing. On the other hand, at a certain point, certainly when that evil becomes a threat, it's important to call it out and say, no, we don't want that. That's bad. And so the question is always, where is that balance, and how much are we doing? Certainly in the book, when Edward is talking about watchers, he is, to a certain extent, talking about watchers who watch and do nothing else. So in the particular example you're talking about, it's a woman that he photographs, and that woman does turn and walk away in a very definitive way that is meant to say, I don't agree with what's happening, this Nazi demonstration in the street. Nonetheless, she does not stand up and be counted in a more visible way. And that's what I'm interested in exploring. If we're only watching and we're not acting, then we are giving evil the audience it craves.
Yeah, very well put. In fact, Edward says something along the lines of, does it reveal more about us as a watcher than the subject that we're watching? And in a lot of respects, what you just said does. I mean, our fascination with things that are gruesome or, prurient, that does reveal something about us, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. Both our fascination and our often paralysis in the face of what we're watching. So I think it does absolutely, the way we watch and whether we act or not defines who we are in a very big way.
Yeah, very much so. And at one point, Edward also said he realized, had he done the same thing as a watcher, as a photographer, by taking the photo. From a reader's standpoint, I loved in your story that you had included so many artists. There were painters, photographers, sculptors, and I don't want to get in on Kristen's got a question coming up, but surrealism in art was a constant theme throughout the novel. Edward, the photographer, said, "The point of surrealism is to provoke." I thought about this for a good while. So even though the artist is observing, snapping a photo, he's showing it. He's not giving you the answer to the photo. He's not telling you what it means, but he is a secret voice in a way, I felt. That he was showing this photo and hoping it would provoke something within the viewer. Nani, for a while in the story, was very interested in Edward's art. She was trying to decipher it and interpret it. At one point, the artists hung their artwork from tree branches, and I loved this visual. It was in the midst of war-torn France. They had a secluded home on the hill, but they had the courage to hang their art from these branches. It brought art into the real world in a way. And I love the art being a secret voice in your story, and I wondered, what is your passion or your belief about art as the writer, and why did you include art in such an important way?
So I'm going to say about the way I think about surrealist art, or at least the way I thought about it when I started writing this is, let's see if I can find this. Yeah, this is Nanet's description of surrealist art. She's going, and this is in the second paragraph of the book, she's going back to a exposition, a surrealist exhibit for her sort of, her adopted brother, basically, Danny. She's going to this exhibit for his benefit, but she describes it as 300 artworks depicting gigantic insects, bizarre floating heads, and dismembered or defiled bodies she knew were meant to be thought-provoking, but always left her feeling unsophisticated and far too American, Midwestern, not even from Chicago, but from Evanston. The real Mary Jane Gold is actually from Evanston, and I'm actually from a suburb north of Chicago, very near Evanston. And that's how I felt about surrealist art when I started it. I had not started this novel. The reason I chose surrealism is because it was true to the time. The real effort that this story is inspired by was an effort led by Varian Fry, an American who went over with a list of people he could get visas for to get them out of France. And many of those people were surrealist artists and writers, which was kind of the main, certainly one of the main disciplines at the time. And surrealism came out of World War I, and it was very much a reaction to that brutality and death and a kind of a negative view of the world. And so I did come to, well, I would probably not ever buy a surrealist painting to hang on my wall. They give me nightmares. I did come to appreciate what the artists were trying to do, which is to make people think about what is going on in the world. So that's why they're surrealists, not because I loved surrealist art before I started the book or as I was writing it or even now, but because that was true to the story. But I will say that one of the things that made me wish to write the book is a painting, a photograph I saw of Danny Benedite literally hanging a Chagall from one of the trees at the real Villa Herbel that the story is based on. And when I saw that photograph, I thought, I don't know what this story is, but I gotta know. So that's often where my stories come from. I see something that provokes an emotion in me, and I want to know, and I start exploring, and then I find something that moves me, and that's where my books start.
And I think it also provoked it in the reader. So as you described the artwork, it made the reader feel like we were in on a secret, maybe, or that we were allowed to hear a voice that had been silenced, that was finding a way. And I have to bring up this game that you have in the book. Let me see, where is it here? It is the...
Exquisite Corpse?
Yes, the Exquisite Corpse,
Yeah.
where the three people would take turns. One would draw a head, one would draw arms, one would draw legs, without the three people seeing what the other person had drawn, until a final product came out that was a creature of some type. But when the people drew their little portion, they were attempting to speak something. So in the original drawing, the woman's head was covered in a bird cage. And all of these little innuendos were so interesting. They played this game several times during the war. I felt as a freedom, maybe a release for things that they were feeling, and or maybe feeling about each other. And did you create this game, or was this a real game from history?
This actually was a real game from history. All of the games that one of the things that intrigued me about this story was the ability for these people, as they are literally risking their lives to save other people, to also manage to have just a great time together. And one of the ways they did that was they hosted these salons held often out on the Belvedere, which is the outside kind of courtyard at Villa Airbel, surrounded by trees and art hanging from the trees. And they played these games. And so one of the difficulties was finding out, I knew that they played the games, I could find that in the research, but what is, like, they played a game called the murder game. Well, exactly what was that, and how did they play that? And so for many of the games, I sort of had to make up what it might have been, because I couldn't find anywhere what they actually had done. But for this particular game, Exquisite Corpse, it was a very, very common surrealist game. The surrealists played it for years before the war started, and it was meant, as you suggest, to free up your subconscious, as is honestly art and writing. I mean, one of the things that always surprises me when I'm writing is things come pouring out of me that I did not realize were there until I started writing. I think that is, that is one of the beauties of creative expression, whether you ever publish or sell your artwork or whatever, whether you hang it on your own walls or whether you stick it in a drawer, as you learn things about yourself. So that's a real game. It's you can look on the internet and Google Exquisite Corpse, and you will see all sorts of weird creatures that they made. As you say, blind drawing, just connecting the lines from what the prior person drew, and it came out of a word game that was, one person would write a noun and another one a verb and adjective, adverb, and they strung blind sentences together that way. And one of the early sentences in the game was, the exquisite corpse drinks the new wine. And so that's where the name Exquisite Corpse comes from. And that was André Breton, who's one of the characters in the book, was truly the leader of surrealism. He was a surrealist writer. He truly lived in Villa Airbel during this period when he does in the book. And he was the father of these games, of many of these games like Exquisite Corpse.
I really loved it, and I thought, I want to play it now. It's a game you could play while waiting for your dinner reservation or anywhere. I mean, Meg, I don't know, box it, sell it, call it something, but you're onto something there.
Oh yeah, I should definitely need to hang on to those, those rights for games and stuff out of my.
I'd like to take a little step further with some of what we were just discussing. Part of the story takes place in a Vichy detention camp that housed Jewish painters, musicians, intellectuals, writers, and they were all waiting for a visa to emigrate. There's a scene where the detainees are creating art out of nothing, using whatever was available. And one of the characters believes that these actions were necessary to remind themselves that they were still human. And also, of course, as Chris mentioned earlier, a balm for anger, perhaps. And I was wondering if you were thinking about the connection between our gifts and our humanity, and whether or not there's something about individual expression that helps us retain that humanity, as opposed to, for example, Nazi guards who perhaps have lost their humanity and that individualism.
Yeah, I think that's so. First of all, that particular moment is based on a real moment that actually happened at Camp de Mille, which was a real camp that actually did intern refugees from the Reich in France, even before the war began. It's a little bit of history that has not been well publicized, but actually exists, and now Camp de Mille is a museum. It's outside of Aix-en-Provence, and if you ever get there, it's very well worth a visit. But one of the photographs I saw there was a picture of Max Ernst, was it Max Ernst, carving a brick, using a brick to sculpt out of a brick, using a penknife and a brick to just make art. And that, like so many things, provoked me to think and look and research. And I do think that one of the things that fascism does is it strips out individuality and elevates conformity and lack of individuality to a place of honor, and in the process, I think that does strip out our humanity. It allows humans to act in a more machine-like way. That can be used to very good effect. For example, in the military, that's something that we do. Everybody, even in our military, people are meant to conform and follow the rules and dress the same way and behave the same way and salute the same people. And that's very effective when you need to be having people do exactly what you need to do when you're in battle. But it has the effect, I think, of dehumanizing us in a way that makes it easier to do evil things and not take responsibility for them. So yeah, I think personal expression in however anybody does it is very, very important to who we are and to supporting the goodness in the world, I guess.
Yeah. What an interesting thought when you look at how Hitler went after certain pieces of art and tried to hoard that. You have to wonder if there was something else at play there in terms of removing that expression of creativity from the public's view. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was an aspiring artist himself. He lived in Austria, in Vienna, for a number of years and tried to get into the elite art school there and never could. So you would think, I think maybe that rejection is something that was very deep in him and caused him to want to reject all the people who rejected him, who were some of the more cutting edge artists. But I don't know, maybe that's just he was an artistic purist. He wanted it the good old-fashioned way, the way it had been done for years, and he did not like creativity in art, which is perhaps why he did not succeed as an artist. If you're not doing something different than what's been going on before you, then what are you adding other than more pretty pictures to the equation?
Yeah, very interesting.
Absolutely. And thank you for all the research that you did. So for our listeners, many of you have read this book. For those of you who haven't, The Postmistress of Paris by Meg Waite Clayton is going to take you back to a real time, a real place, real people, then a fiction story woven out of it. So we're being entertained, but we're learning something. And we're not being told what to believe. You are placing us inside of characters at a certain period of time where we are able to feel these emotions. And you did a beautiful job with it. Thank you. I have to ask you, what's on your radar? What are you working on now? And for our YouTube watchers, does this have anything to do with all of these wonderful blue notes that you have on the bulletin board behind you?
Yeah, this is you get the working view of my office, because the rest of my office right now is a total mess. This is for the YouTube watchers, anybody who wants to poke around, and this kind of picture is up in a lot of places on the internet, including on my Facebook page and my Instagram page and all that. This is what I call my working board. It's the cards are basically chapters, scenes from my next novel. That's a magnetic board. It's just on painted magnetic paint on my wall, so it sticks pretty well. And the only thing is, and so I can just pull off the magnets and pop them back on. And the only thing is, you have to be very careful not to point a fan here, or everything goes wild. But I'm actually, anybody who is looking here will see that there are kind of two colors of cards and a lot of space in between. That's a little unusual for me. I'm actually moving 2 stories forward in kind of, I set one aside and work on one, and then I set one aside and work on the other one. That's very unusual for me. I don't know why I'm doing it. I think it probably has something to do with the fact that I've lost both my parents in the last about 18 months, and I have less attention span than I usually have. But so I'm working on 2, and one of them, my editor will be very happy to hear, is very much in the vein of the Postmistress of Paris, the Last Train to London, and the Race for Paris. It's a World War II story. It's set in Paris, very solidly in Paris. You know, the Postmistress of Paris takes place both in Paris and then in southern France as well. This one, while it has some travels into other parts of France, is very solidly set in Paris during the war. And I always hate to talk about books that I'm working on, because I'll tell you my 5th novel, I think it was my 5th novel, The Race for Paris. It was going to be my 3rd novel, and it was going to be my 4th novel, and it only got published after I stopped saying it was going to be my next novel. So I always feel a little bit like I'm jinxing myself talking about what I'm writing. But the World War II one is a book about books. And then the other one is because for me always, I'm going to start out by saying it's a book set in Carmel, where I live right now, Carmel by the Sea, California. For me, always setting is very important to my writing. I cannot write without imagining the place that I'm writing in, or actually sitting in the place I'm writing in is even better, especially because that gives me an excuse to go to Paris a lot, which I love. But because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to get to Paris. And even though I spent a lot of time there, there's research I would like to do there that I can't get to do. And so that's the Carmel story. It's a place I'm living in now. I can walk the streets now. I can walk along the coast now. And so all that, all the stimulation that comes from being in a place can inform that novel now in a way that the Paris novel, I'm steeped enough in Paris that I could probably write that one too. I am writing it too, but it's not the same as, you know, if you're actually writing in Paris. And so, like, for example, The Postmistress of Paris, I did a lot of the writing of that book while I was in France and in Paris. And that just works for me in a way that I don't know why, it just does.
And it comes out absolutely vividly for the reader because we felt like we were actually there. Sight, sound, smell, everything. Thank you for going to these great lengths to give us such beautiful stories. And I want to say to all of our listeners, you're going to want to connect with Meg Waite Clayton. You can find her at her website, which is megwaiteclayton.com. She has a newsletter that you can sign up for there to see what she's up to, and you can find her on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you, Meg. We can't wait to see what you have coming out next. Everyone's going to be excited for the paperback version of this beautiful story, and we're sorry for your loss. We understand what that feels like. Keep plugging along and writing because you are inspiring the world with your books.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for this opportunity to chat about the book and with such intelligent readers. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
I love talking to her, and you were onto something there with your last question because this hit me so strongly. Hitler imprisoned all of these artists, these writers, these poets, these painters. You would think this would be the least dangerous group that you would want to imprison, but they were the silent voices. They were the not the mainstream thinkers, but out of the box seers, feelers, sensors who were showing the world maybe what they were missing. Is that what your take was on that, Kristen?
Yeah, I thought, first of all, as a community of creatives, I love the fact that creatives often help us process trauma and process difficult things. And here we have the creators themselves, the creatives, who were still trying to process what they were experiencing. And I thought it was such a beautiful part of the book. I was I was riveted by those scenes, actually. And I was also very struck by something that Meg said when she was talking about this idea of conformity and sometimes the dangers maybe outside of that military context. Because, conformity is something that on any end of the spectrum can be dangerous, right? Because without that creative expression, we're not provoked to think in a different or new way. And wow, how did we see that in the story? That was just incredible.
And isn't that something that we still deal with today? Because we sometimes, I've always said this, like colleges or in certain institutions, they're looking for a certain type of person. Different corporations who are hiring, they're looking for someone to check the boxes. Well, maybe we're missing it a little bit here. Maybe we need people who aren't checking the boxes, who think outside the box, who are bringing fresh ideas and new talents and voices. I loved what Edward said in the book because he was an artist and a photographer. He said, and I'm going to quote, "It wasn't success that made me an artist. I was an artist. An artist simply is. The selling of my art no more made me a man or an artist than a man is made by art." So I just thought, for anyone out there who's aspiring to do anything in life, we have to stop listening to these outside voices who tell us whether we are or not doing it. And the selling of it doesn't qualify it. The mass approval doesn't qualify it. If you're a writer, you're a writer. If you're a painter, you're a painter. If you're a sculptor, you're a sculptor. If you're an interior designer, you're an interior designer. What other art forms are there? Whatever there is, do your craft, hone your craft, study it, practice it, enjoy it, and maybe we all, and I know I need to learn this, don't be so waiting for approval. It's not contingent upon approval. You simply are that artist.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. We do hear from a lot of people just because of what we do. I want to be a writer. And if you're writing, you're a writer. And you got to kind of drill that in your head, right? Because that is your gift, that is your expression. And I love that. Commercial success does not dictate whether or not you can call yourself a writer or a singer. But this idea of creativity, I love how our discussion really turned to this idea of humanity, because it is an essential part of our humanity, just as if we are, spiritual in nature, that's an essential part of our humanity. Wrestling with moral issues, an essential part of our humanity. This is who we are as humans. We're complicated, we're complex, and I think a big part of that is these gifts that we use to express what is on the inside.
I love that you said that. And because we cannot exist apart from our gifts, our talents, our passion. I think those two little characters she created, the dog and the stuffed animal, it just showed that we are very deep feeler thinker beings.
Yeah.
We are not just going to follow in line and obey orders. We have ideas of our own that we have to be able to express even in prison in some sort of way.
In fact, I think that's why our work also has to line up with some of the interests and the aptitudes that we have. Because when your work doesn't have anything to do with those abilities, then that's where I think sometimes we're not satisfied or fulfilled with our work. And having the ability to line up what you do professionally with what it is that gives you joy and energy, that is where a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment comes.
Absolutely, I agree. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. We have a wonderful lineup ahead. We're going to be interviewing Lori Lico Albanese and her book Hester. We had Brendan Slocum, The Violin Conspiracy, Viola Shipman, The Edge of Summer, Lisa Unger, Secluded Cabin Sleep 6, John Searles, Her Last Affair, William Kent Kruger, Fox Creek, Shelby Van Pelt, Remarkably Bright Creatures. These books are amazing. You're going to love them. And as always, got to give a shout out to this guy. You know him by now. He's become a household name. The Mr. Mark Carey, extraordinaire, producer, sound engineer.
Hello, everybody. Hope you enjoyed today's show. We will see you again next week.
Don't be fooled by the unassuming black t-shirt. The guy is a genius, and he's why we look good.
In the meantime, listeners, stay on the radar with Bookstorm by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now TikTok. And if you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our fantastic authors, we are now on YouTube as well. Just search for Bookstorm and Podcast, and we will be there. Until the next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.